The bright lights of the Fox News studio blazed down, casting a dramatic glow on what would soon become one of the most unforgettable moments in cable news history. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk, his trademark smirk firmly in place, confident he was about to deliver another sharp-witted takedown of a Democratic Congresswoman. But in the next 30 seconds, he would find himself utterly speechless, and the nation would witness a seismic shift in how political confrontations are perceived. Congresswoman JASMINE CROCKETT stepped onto the set of the Gutfeld show, anticipating tough questions about her recent criminal justice reform bill. What she didn't expect was for Gutfeld to cross a line so egregious it would spark a firestorm across social media, forcing a raw, unfiltered conversation about respect in political discourse. "You know what, Congresswoman?" Gutfeld said, leaning forward with that familiar, biting tone. "If you don't like how we do things in America, maybe you should go back to where you came from." The studio audience fell deathly silent. The camera caught Crockett's face, not shocked, not angry, but calculating, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire career. What followed wasn't just a response. It was a masterclass in turning an attack into a triumph, a moment that would reverberate far beyond the studio walls. The tension in Studio B was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Gutfeld, the host of Fox News' late-night comedy juggernaut, had built a career on provocative one-liners and jabs at liberal politicians. At 59, he thought he'd seen it all, his quick wit and biting humor a shield against any pushback. But across from him sat JASMINE CROCKETT, the 43-year-old Congresswoman from Texas, a rising star known for her fierce advocacy for criminal justice reform and her refusal to bow to anyone. This wasn't meant to be a hostile interview. Crockett had been invited to discuss her bill aimed at reducing mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, a policy rooted in her years as a public defender. But Gutfeld had other plans. For the first 10 minutes, he lobbed jokes about woke politics and questioned whether Crockett understood the real America. The breaking point came when she pushed back on his framing of her bill as soft on crime. That's when he dropped the line that would define both their legacies. "You know what, Congresswoman? If you don't like how we do things in America, maybe you should go back to where you came from." The words landed like a grenade. The audience, usually quick to chuckle at Gutfeld's provocations, froze. Even his regular panelists, seasoned commentators named Marcus Tate and Lila Monroe, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She smiled. And that smile was Gutfeld's first warning that he'd just stepped into a trap. "Mr. Gutfeld," she said, her voice calm, steady, and piercing, "I think you've just given me the perfect opportunity to teach you and your viewers something very important." The camera zoomed in, capturing the quiet confidence in her eyes. This wasn't a politician scrambling to save face. This was someone who'd been preparing for this exact moment. Gutfeld, sensing he might have overstepped, even for cable news, tried to backpedal. "Well, I mean, if you're not happy with American policies," Crockett raised her hand, a simple gesture that commanded the room. The studio fell silent. No, Mr. Gutfeld. You said what you said, and now I'm going to respond." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her movements deliberate, almost theatrical. "Because, you see, I did a little research before coming on your show tonight, and I found something very interesting about where people should go back to." The camera operators, sensing the brewing drama, tightened their shots. Gutfeld's smirk began to falter, replaced by a flicker of unease. Social media was already ablaze. Clips of his "go back" comments spreading like wildfire across platforms. But no one was prepared for what Crockett was about to unleash. She unfolded the paper with precision, each movement calculated for maximum effect. "You know, Greg, may I call you Greg? You told me to go back to where I came from. Well, I'm from Dallas, Texas, born and raised. But I'm curious about your background." She looked directly into the camera, addressing not just Gutfeld, but millions of viewers. "Because, according to public records, your family immigrated here just 2 generations ago. So, if we're talking about going back to where we came from, maybe we should start with you." The studio erupted, not in laughter, but in shocked gasps and murmurs. Gutfeld's face flushed a deep red. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but Crockett was relentless, her voice steady and commanding. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a dismantling of the power dynamics that would be dissected by analysts for months. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you need to know who these two people are and what they represent. This wasn't just a clash between a talk show host and a politician. It was a collision of two opposing visions of America, two generations, two approaches to discourse. Greg Gutfeld had spent 15 years carving out his niche as Fox News' provocateur-in-chief. Starting as a magazine editor, he'd reinvented himself as cable news' answer to late-night comedy, blending conservative talking points with edgy humor that often towed the line of acceptability. His show, The Gutfeld Show, was a ratings powerhouse, often outpacing traditional late-night hosts in key demographics. At 59, he embodied the old guard of conservative media. White male, unafraid to say what others wouldn't. His fans loved him for his authenticity, his willingness to call out what he saw as liberal hypocrisy and elite condescension. To them, he was the friend who spoke uncomfortable truths. But his critics saw something uglier. A man whose humor often punched down, whose just asking questions shtick gave cover to harmful stereotypes, whose platform legitimized divisive ideas. Jasmine Crockett was everything Gutfeld's audience loved to vilify. At 43, she was young, black, female, and unapologetically progressive. But she was more than that. She was formidable. Crockett hadn't stumbled into politics through privilege or connections. She'd risen from the trenches of public defense, spending years in Texas courtrooms fighting for clients who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers. Born and raised in Dallas, she'd seen the criminal justice system's inequities up close. Young black men sentenced to decades for crimes that earned white defendants probation, families torn apart by mandatory minimums that even judges called unjust. That experience fueled her run for Congress, a grueling climb against better-funded opponents and dismissive insiders who thought she was too outspoken, too inexperienced, too unwilling to play Washington's games. But she won, powered by grassroots support from communities tired of being ignored. What made Crockett a threat to someone like Gutfeld wasn't just her politics, it was her competence. She didn't fit the caricature of the uninformed progressive that conservative media loved to mock. She was a lawyer who knew her facts, a politician who could cite statistics on the fly, a black woman who refused to be silenced by dog whistles or intimidation. This confrontation wasn't just personal. It was a battle over who gets to define American identity. Gutfeld's Go Back comment wasn't a one-off. It echoed the language used to marginalize immigrants, people of color, anyone who didn't fit a narrow vision of real Americans. For Crockett, it was a direct attack on her right to belong, to have ideas, to hold power. It was the kind of casual racism dressed up as commentary that had gone unchecked for too long. But there was more at stake here, the future of political discourse itself. For years, media figures like Gutfeld had pushed boundaries, claiming, just joking, or just asking questions to dodge accountability for inflammatory remarks. What would have ended careers decades ago now barely made headlines. Crockett knew her response would be watched by millions, especially young people of color wondering if there was still a place for them in American politics. She understood that how she handled this moment would either reinforce the idea that people like her should stay quiet or prove there was another way, one where preparation, intelligence, and dignity could outshine privilege and provocation. The audience was divided, a microcosm of America's fault lines. Gutfeld's fans expected him to expose Crockett as another out-of-touch liberal. They wanted confirmation that their worldview was right, that people like her were the problem. But others were watching too, people tired of seeing those who looked like them disrespected, dismissed, or dehumanized. They were waiting to see if Crockett would fight back, if she'd stand up for herself and for them. The tension was electric because everyone in that studio knew this wasn't just another interview gone wrong. This was a defining moment, a clash of visions that would reveal something profound about who we are and who we want to be. The cameras in Studio B rolled on, capturing every second of the electric standoff between Greg Gutfeld and Congresswoman JASMINE CROCKETT. The air crackled with anticipation as Crockett held her folded paper, her calm smile a stark contrast to Gutfeld's faltering smirk. She'd just dropped a bombshell, revealing that Gutfeld's family had immigrated to America only 2 generations ago, flipping his "go back where you came from" attack on its head. The studio audience was still reeling, a mix of shocked murmurs and uneasy silence, while social media erupted with clips of the exchange, hashtags like Crockett Takedown trending worldwide. But Crockett wasn't done. She was just warming up, and what she did next would elevate this moment from a viral clash to a masterclass in political strategy. "You know, Greg," she continued, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity, "when you tell people to go back where they came from, you're making some bold assumptions. You're assuming I'm somehow less American than you. You're assuming my ideas about fairness, about justice, about giving people a second chance aren't American values." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The camera caught Gutfeld shifting in his seat, his usual confidence replaced by a flicker of unease. He tried to interject, "Look, I was just saying," but Crockett powered through, her voice cutting through as like a blade through paper. "No, let's talk about this, Greg. Because here's what's fascinating. According to the research I had done after your team confirmed this interview, your great-grandfather came to America in the early 20th century. She glanced at her paper, then back at Gutfeld, her eyes locking onto his. "That makes you a third-generation American. Meanwhile, my family has been in Texas since the late 19th century. The studio went dead silent. Even Marcus Tate and Lila Monroe, Gutfeld's panelists, sat frozen, their usual quips nowhere to be found. Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was dismantling the entire premise of Gutfeld's attack with cold, hard facts. "So, if we're playing this go back where you came from game," she said, her tone sharp but controlled, "it sounds like you'd be headed back to Eastern Europe long before I'd be going anywhere. But here's the thing, Greg, I don't think you should go anywhere. Because that's not what America is about." The audience gasped, a mix of shock and reluctant admiration. Gutfeld's face was a study in discomfort, his usual pale complexion now a deep shade of red. He tried to recover, his voice cracking slightly. "Well, that's not what I meant, and you know it. I was talking about political philosophy, about values." "Oh, you want to talk about values?" Crockett's eyes lit up, her voice taking on a new edge, like a prosecutor who'd just caught a witness in a lie. "Let's talk about values. Let's talk about the value of treating people with respect, no matter where they're from. Let's talk about the value of doing your homework before you try to humiliate someone on national television. Let's talk about the value of understanding that being American isn't about how long your family's been here. It's about embracing the principles this country was built on." She reached into her blazer again, pulling out another document with the same deliberate precision. Gutfeld's expression shifted from red to pale, as if he sensed a second wave coming. "See, I also looked into your show's content over the past year," Crockett said, her voice calm but unrelenting. "And I found something interesting. Do you know how many times you've told someone to go back where they came from, or made similar remarks? 47 times, Greg. And do you know what every single one of those targets had in common?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air, the silence so thick it felt like the room was holding its breath. They were all people of color. Every single one. Isn't that interesting? Social media was a wildfire now. Crockett Masterclass was climbing the charts alongside Gutfeld Exposed, with clips of her genealogy reveal and this latest bombshell shared thousands of times per minute. Political commentators, both liberal and conservative, were scrambling to keep up, live tweeting the exchange as it unfolded. Crockett wasn't just winning a debate. She was exposing a pattern, and the world was watching. But she wasn't done. She understood that moments like this were rare, a chance to speak directly to millions about issues that too often got drowned out by noise. "You know what the saddest part is, Greg?" she said, her voice softening slightly, but not losing its edge. We actually agree on some things. We both want America to be safe. We both want opportunities for working families. We both want our kids to grow up in a country where hard work means something. But instead of having that conversation, you chose to question my right to be here, my right to have ideas, my right to be part of this democracy. The audience was shifting now, some of Gutfeld's loyal fans looking uncomfortable, others visibly moved by Crockett's words. The room was a mirror of the country, divided, tense, but for the first time in a long time, the person under attack was holding the floor. Gutfeld tried to regain control, his voice lacking its usual bravado. Look, I think you're being overly sensitive here. This is comedy. This is political commentary. We're just having a discussion about policies. Comedy? Crockett's voice rose for the first time, a flash of real emotion breaking through her calm. Telling a black woman to go back where she came from is comedy to you, Greg? That's the same language used to terrorize my grandparents. That's the same language used to justify segregation, to justify violence, to justify treating people like me as less than. And you think it's funny? The camera zoomed in on Gutfeld's face. Catching the moment, he realized he'd waded into waters far deeper than he'd anticipated. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about the soul of American discourse, and he was losing ground fast. I've spent my entire career as a public defender fighting for people who were told they didn't belong, who were told they didn't matter, who were told to stay quiet and know their place. Crockett continued, her voice steady again but brimming with conviction. And now I'm in Congress, and I'm still fighting for those same people. But apparently, that makes me un-American in your eyes. She turned to the main camera, speaking directly to the millions watching at home. To everyone out there who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever been told to go back where they came from, who's ever felt like their voice doesn't matter. This is your moment, too. We belong here. Our ideas matter. Our voices count. And we're not going anywhere. The applause started slowly, a few claps from the back of the studio, then built into a wave that swept through the room. Even some of Gutfeld's supporters joined in, moved by the raw power of her words. This wasn't just political theater. It was a moment of leadership, of someone seizing a stage meant to humiliate her and turning it into a platform for truth. But Crockett had one more card to play. As the applause died down, she flashed that same calm smile that had started this exchange. "Oh, and Greg, one more thing," she said, her tone almost playful but with a steel edge. "That genealogy research I mentioned, it showed something else interesting about your family history. But I think I'll save that for another time. Unless, of course, you'd like to have a real conversation about immigration, about belonging, about what it means to be American. I'm always available for that discussion." The threat was subtle but devastating. Crockett had more in her arsenal, and she wasn't afraid to use it if Gutfeld pushed further. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The hunter had become the hunted, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Gutfeld, visibly flustered, made one last attempt to claw back control. "Well, Congresswoman, I think our viewers can see exactly what kind of politician you are. This is typical Washington grandstanding, turning a simple question into a victim narrative." The words were barely out of his mouth when Crockett delivered the checkmate. She stood up from her chair, a bold move that shifted the visual dynamics of the interview. Suddenly, she was looking down at Gutfeld, who remained seated behind his desk, looking smaller by the second. "A simple question, Greg," she said, her voice dripping with controlled indignation. "You told me to go back where I came from. But let me tell your viewers something you clearly don't know about me. Something you'd have learned if you'd done any research before trying to humiliate me on national television." She stood tall, her presence commanding the room. "I'm not just a congresswoman, Greg. I'm a former public defender who spent 10 years in Texas courts fighting for justice. I'm the daughter of a veteran who served this country for 20 years. I'm a product of Dallas public schools who earned a law degree through hard work and grit. And yes, I'm a black woman who refuses to be silenced by casual racism disguised as political commentary." The camera captured the stark contrast between them. Crockett, standing confident and in control, and Gutfeld, slumped in his chair, his usual smirk replaced by the uneasy look of someone who'd miscalculated badly. The studio was hers, and she wasn't finished. The Fox News studio was a pressure cooker, every eye glued to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett as she stood tall, her presence commanding the room. Greg Gutfeld, usually the unflappable provocateur, sat pinned behind his desk, his face a mix of defiance and unease. Crockett had just turned his go-back-where-you-came-from attack into a devastating counterstrike, revealing his family's recent immigration history and exposing a pattern of targeting people of color with similar remarks. The audience, a mix of Gutfeld's loyal fans and curious onlookers, hung on her every word, while social media exploded with hashtags like Crockett Masterclass and Gutfeld Exposed. But Crockett wasn't just dismantling Gutfeld's narrative. She was rewriting the script, turning a moment of division into a platform for progress. And she was far from finished. But here's what really tells you everything you need to know about the difference between us, Crockett said, her voice steady but brimming with purpose. She reached for her phone with the same deliberate precision she'd used to pull out her documents, each movement calculated to hold the room's attention. While you were preparing to attack my character and question my patriotism, Greg, I was actually doing something productive. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with what appeared to be a string of text messages. I was working with Republican senators, yes, Republican senators, on a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill that has the support of police chiefs, prosecutors, and victim advocacy groups across the country. The studio audience stirred, a murmur of surprise rippling through the crowd. Gutfeld's panelists, Marcus Tate and Lila Monroe, exchanged glances, their silence deafening. Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength. In fact, I got a message just before coming on your show tonight from Senator William Hayes, not exactly a liberal firebrand, telling me our bill has enough votes to pass. So, while you're here playing racial politics for your audience, I'm out there getting things done for the American people. The mention of Senator William Hayes, a staunch conservative known for his tough-on-crime stance, was a masterstroke. It wasn't just that Crockett was defending herself. She was proving she could bridge divides, work across the aisle, and deliver results. The camera caught Gutfeld's jaw tightening, his usual quick wit nowhere to be found. He tried to interject, his voice strained. Well, that's great, but I still think... Crockett cut him off with a gesture so polite, yet so commanding it silenced him instantly. Greg, I'm going to stop you right there, because your viewers deserve to know something else. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. Earlier, I mentioned that genealogy research I had done on your family. Well, it turns out your great-grandfather didn't just immigrate to America in the early 20th century. He was fleeing Eastern Europe because of some, let's call them questionable business dealings. The color drained from Gutfeld's face, his usual bravado replaced by a flicker of panic. Crockett's research wasn't just about dates. She'd dug deep enough to uncover secrets he likely thought were buried. Now, I'm not going to embarrass you by airing all the details, she said, her tone magnanimous but firm, because, unlike some people, I believe in treating others with dignity, even when they don't extend me the same courtesy. But if we're going to judge people by their family history, if we're going to question who has the right to be here, then maybe we should all be careful about throwing stones in glass houses. The audience was utterly captivated, the room a mix of stunned silence and scattered applause. This wasn't just a political interview anymore. It was a masterclass in how to confront prejudice with precision and grace. Social media was in overdrive, with clips of Crockett's latest reveal spreading faster than the last. Progressive voices cheered her tactical brilliance, while even some conservative commentators admitted, if grudgingly, that she'd outmaneuvered their star. Crockett for president began trending alongside Gutfeld destroyed, a testament to the moment's seismic impact. But you know what the most important thing is here? Crockett said, her voice softening, almost as if she were speaking to a friend rather than a foe. It's not your family history, Greg. It's not even your comments tonight. It's the choice you're making right now. You can double down on division, on disrespect, on cheap shots, and racial dog whistles. Or you can choose to be better. You can choose to have real conversations about real issues. She sat back down, but her presence still loomed large, towering over Gutfeld in a way that transcended physical space. The criminal justice reform bill I mentioned, it's not just some liberal talking point. It's about reducing recidivism, saving taxpayers billions, and keeping families together while still holding people accountable. That's the kind of thing we could be talking about, Greg. That's the kind of conversation America needs. The pause that followed was electric, the most powerful moment of the night. Crockett had offered Gutfeld an olive branch, a chance to pivot, to engage with substance rather than sensationalism. The studio audience held its breath, waiting to see if he'd take it. Social media paused its frenzy, as if the world itself were watching to see what came next. Political reporters, already drafting their headlines, knew this was a moment that would define careers and shape discourse for years to come. Gutfeld looked around the studio, then at Crockett, then down at his desk. For a fleeting moment, it seemed he might rise to the occasion, might acknowledge the weight of her words and shift gears. But then his instincts, honed over years of never backing down, never admitting fault, kicked in. "Well," he said, his voice thin and unconvincing, "I think our viewers can judge for themselves who's really interested in solutions and who's just grandstanding." It was the wrong move, and the room felt it immediately. Even his loyal fans, who'd come expecting another liberal takedown, seemed deflated. Marcus Tate and Lila Monroe, usually quick to back him up, stayed silent, their faces unreadable. Crockett just smiled, not a triumphant grin, but a sad, knowing one. "I think they can too, Greg," she said softly. And I think they just did. The applause erupted again, louder this time, rolling through the studio like a wave. It wasn't just for Crockett's words, but for the way she'd carried herself, unflinching, prepared, and dignified in the face of an attack meant to tear her down. The cameras caught every angle. Crockett, poised and resolute. Gutfeld, diminished behind his desk. The audience, a mix of awe and unease. And the panelists, grappling with the fact that their host had been thoroughly outclassed. As the segment went to commercial, the fallout was already beginning. Social media was a storm of reactions, with clips of Crockett's genealogy bombshell and her bipartisan bill reveal dominating every platform. Progressive activists hailed her as a hero, while some conservative voices, though loath to admit it, praised her preparation. She came loaded for bear. One right-leaning commentator tweeted, a rare nod of respect across the aisle. The hashtag Crockett Masterclass was now trending globally, with memes and reaction videos multiplying by the second. But the real impact was happening beyond the studio. Crockett's criminal justice reform bill, which had been languishing in committee, was suddenly the talk of every newsroom. Political analysts marveled at how she'd turned a racist attack into a policy discussion, a move so deft it was already being studied as a case study in political communication. Within hours, 2 more Republican senators, moderates who'd been on the fence, reached out to Crockett's office, signaling their support for the bill. Her phone buzzed with notifications, messages from allies, invitations to speak at major events, and even a few cautious overtures from conservative groups intrigued by her bipartisan approach. For Gutfeld, the night was a disaster unfolding in real time. His core audience would stick by him, but the broader viewership, moderates, independents, and even some Republicans, were recoiling. The go-back comment wasn't just a misstep. It was a line crossed, one that echoed a history of exclusion too raw to ignore. Fox News executives, already navigating a minefield of controversies, were reportedly furious, with whispers that Gutfeld's job might be on the line if the backlash grew. Investigative journalists, spurred by Crockett's genealogy reveal, were already digging into Gutfeld's family history, chasing leads about his great-grandfather's questionable business dealings. While nothing criminal surfaced, the irony of his anti-immigrant rhetoric coming from a third-generation American was too rich to ignore. Crockett, meanwhile, left the studio with her head high, her team buzzing with adrenaline. She'd known coming on a Gutfeld show was a risk, But she'd prepared for every scenario, arming herself with research and resolve. As she stepped into the green room, her chief of staff, Maya Carter, handed her a tablet showing the social media metrics. Millions of views, thousands of retweets, and a flood of donations pouring into her campaign fund. "You didn't just win tonight," Maya said, her voice thick with pride. "You changed the game." But Crockett wasn't celebrating yet. She knew this moment, as powerful as it was just the beginning. The bill she'd fought for was gaining traction, but it still needed to pass. The conversation about race and belonging she'd sparked was resonating, but it would face pushback. And Gutfeld, bruised but not broken, would likely come back swinging, backed by a loyal audience eager to see him reclaim his narrative. As she left the studio, the New York night buzzing around her, Crockett felt the weight of what she'd done and what was still to come. This wasn't just about one night on cable news. It was about showing America that dignity and intelligence could triumph over division, that preparation could outshine provocation, and that the fight for justice was worth every second of the battle. The aftermath of the explosive confrontation between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Greg Gutfeld on the Gutfeld show began before the cameras even cut to commercial. Studio B was still buzzing as the segment ended, the audience torn between stunned silence and bursts of applause. Crockett had not only deflected Gutfeld's "go back where you came from" attack, but had turned it into a masterclass in preparation, dignity, and strategic brilliance. Social media was a maelstrom, with hashtags like Crockett Masterclass and Gutfeld exposed dominating global trends. Clips of her genealogy reveal, her bipartisan bill announcement, and her final, devastating takedown were shared millions of times, reshaping the national conversation. But the true impact of that night in the Fox News studio would unfold in the days, weeks, and months that followed, leaving an indelible mark on American politics and media. As Crockett stepped out of the studio into the cool New York night, her phone vibrated incessantly with notifications. Her chief of staff, Maya Carter, was already fielding calls from major news outlets, advocacy groups, and even a few Republican operatives who saw her performance as a game-changer. "You didn't just take down Gutfeld," Maya said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "You've got the whole country talking about your bill and about what it means to be American." Donations to Crockett's campaign fund surged by 400% within hours, and speaking requests poured in from universities, civil rights organizations, and even conservative think tanks curious about her ability to work across the aisle. But Crockett remained focused, her mind already on the next steps. Pushing her criminal justice reform bill through Congress and ensuring the conversation she'd sparked didn't fade into the noise of the news cycle. The bill itself became an overnight sensation. What had been a struggling piece of legislation, mired in committee debates, was now the subject of every major news program. Crockett's mention of bipartisan support, particularly from conservative Senator William Hayes, had lit a fire under the Senate. Within 48 hours, 3 more Republican senators signed on as co-sponsors, giving the bill enough momentum to virtually guarantee passage. Political analysts marveled at Crockett's ability to turn a personal attack into a policy triumph. "She didn't just defend herself," one commentator wrote. "She redefined the narrative, making criminal justice reform a unifying issue in a divided country." The bill, officially titled the Fair Sentencing Act, aimed to reduce mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug offenses, emphasizing rehabilitation over punishment. Its growing support was a testament to Crockett's strategic genius. She'd used Gutfeld's stage to amplify her work, not just her words. For Gutfeld, the fallout was far less triumphant. His show's ratings spiked initially, as curious viewers tuned in to see how he'd respond to the viral moment. But the audience composition shifted dramatically. While his core conservative base remained loyal, he lost significant viewership among moderates and independents who found his go-back comment indefensible. Fox News executives, already grappling with a string of controversies, were reportedly livid. Whispers circulated that Gutfeld had been called into closed-door meetings, with network brass warning that another misstep could jeopardize his tenure. Investigative journalists, spurred by Crockett's genealogy bombshell, dug deeper into Gutfeld's family history. While they found no evidence of criminal activity, they uncovered details about his great-grandfather's hasty departure from Eastern Europe, details that clashed sharply with Gutfeld's frequent anti-immigrant rhetoric. The irony was inescapable, and it became a symbol of the hypocrisy Crockett had exposed. The broader conversation about racism in political media took on a life of its own. Journalism schools began using the Crockett-Gutfeld exchange as a case study, analyzing both Gutfeld's overreach and Crockett's masterful response. The phrase, "go back where you came from," was added to several media-style guides as language to avoid a direct result of the public outcry. Advertisers, increasingly sensitive to associating with divisive content, began pulling back from shows that relied on inflammatory rhetoric, forcing networks to rethink their approach to political commentary. Crockett didn't just win a debate, one media scholar noted. She forced the industry to reckon with its complicity in normalizing harmful tropes. Crockett's career soared in the wake of the confrontation. Her performance on The Gutfeld Show established her as a rising star in the Democratic Party, with pundits floating her name for higher office, Senate, governor, even a future presidential run. But what set her apart was her ability to bridge progressive ideals with practical governance. The Fair Sentencing Act, which she'd championed, was fast-tracked for a floor vote and passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. 3 months after the confrontation, the bill was signed into law during a White House ceremony, with Crockett standing proudly behind the president as he praised her courage and preparation for turning a moment of division into progress. The law promised to reduce recidivism, save billions in taxpayer dollars, and keep families together. Exactly the kind of substantive change Crockett had promised on Gutfeld's stage. The long-term impact of that night extended far beyond the individuals involved. Political consultants coined the term "pulling a Crockett" to describe the strategy of coming to hostile interviews armed with research, facts, and a plan to turn defense into offense. The exchange became required viewing in political communication courses, cited as a turning point in how marginalized politicians could confront discrimination without stooping to their attackers' level. For young people of color considering careers in politics, Crockett's performance was a beacon of hope, a roadmap for navigating a system that often seemed stacked against them. She showed us that you don't have to become a bully to beat one. A college student tweeted, her words echoed by thousands. The media landscape itself began to shift. Major news organizations implemented stricter guidelines on language that could be seen as discriminatory or inflammatory. Some commentators, wary of becoming the next Gutfeld, toned down their rhetoric, focusing more on policy than personal attacks. The public, too, seemed to demand more substance, with polls showing a growing appetite for issue-driven discourse over sensationalism. The phrase, "go back where you came from," became so toxic that politicians and pundits across the spectrum avoided similar language, wary of inviting the kind of backlash Gutfeld had faced. Gutfeld returned to his show after a brief hiatus, his approach noticeably subdued. While he remained a conservative firebrand, he steered clear of the personal attacks and racial provocations that had once defined his brand. Industry insiders reported that Fox News had issued a clear directive. Another incident like the Crockett confrontation could end his run. His panelists, Marcus Tate and Lila Monroe, were more cautious too, their usual snark tempered by the memory of being outshone on their own stage. Gutfeld never publicly apologized, but his silence on the issue spoke volumes, a tacit admission that he'd been outmatched. For Crockett, the moment was a launch pad, but she remained grounded. She continued to champion criminal justice reform, working with both parties to implement the new law and advocate for further changes. Her ability to turn a racist attack into a policy victory earned her respect even from opponents, with conservative commentators praising her pragmatism, if not her politics. She became a sought-after voice on issues of race, belonging, and governance, speaking at events that drew diverse crowds hungry for her perspective. Yet she never lost sight of her roots, returning often to Dallas to meet with the communities that had sent her to Congress, listening to their stories and ensuring their voices were heard. The story of that night, a single cable news segment that became a catalyst for change, became a case study in schools across America. It was taught as a lesson in how preparation and dignity could triumph over prejudice, how intelligence could outshine provocation, how a moment of division could spark unity. Crockett's response wasn't just about defending herself. It was about showing America a better way forward, one where facts and humanity could prevail over hatred and division. The Fair Sentencing Act stood as a tangible legacy, but the broader impact was intangible yet profound, a shift in how Americans saw themselves and their democracy. As the dust settled, the nation was left with a powerful reminder. In a world of sound bites and outrage, the most effective weapon against discrimination wasn't anger. It was intelligence, wielded with unwavering dignity. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won a debate that night in Studio B. She'd shown what was possible when someone refused to be silenced, refused to be diminished, and refused to let division have the last word. The question now was not whether she'd change the conversation, but how far that change would ripple.